Okay, what I wanted to go over next is CPR supplemented with an AED, which is an acronym for Automated External Defibrillator. We're going to be going over a generic AED. We're going to talk about the parts that it comes with, the do's and don'ts, how it works, and then we'll put it all together. Looking at this particular AED, let's take a look at the front first. The front pouch has a section for, sometimes it might have adult identical pads. Sometimes these pads can be children's and or infant pads. It also has a slot for what's called an AED prep kit. Let's take a look. Scissors are for cutting off the clothing and also cutting off the patient's bra. Keep in mind, when we're doing CPR and CPR only, clothing is optional, although we encourage that you take all of the clothing off. It's not mandatory to take the shirt off to provide high quality CPR. However, once the AED arrives into the scene, that is no longer negotiable. You need to make sure you're taking the shirt off and also taking the bra off so these pads can go directly on the patient's bare, dry chest. Razor, this is just to make sure that we have a good purchase point that we need in case the patient is extremely hairy. We want to make sure we're shaving off their chest hair and not their facial hair. So shaving the chest hair, get the purchase point that you need, you use the razor provided to you. Gloves, this is just for our own personal protective equipment. Anytime we're dealing with patients with any bodily fluids, it's encouraged that we have gloves on at the bare minimum. Blue cloth here, a common signs and symptoms of a patient that goes into cardiac arrest. Prior to that is to have a heart attack. Common signs and symptoms, they perspire. If it happens outside in the rain, you want to make sure you're wiping off any excess moisture. For my personal experience, I just use the patient's clothing anyways, but if there is a blue cloth or any cloth, you can use that to wipe off any excess moisture. So that way the pads go again directly on the patient's bare, dry chest. Last but not least, this particular brand has this barrier device here. This allows us to breathe for this patient while also giving us that extra layer of protection. Clearly goes to where the nose goes on the patient. This goes to where the chin goes, and this provides us one more layer of protection with a HEPA filter or at least a one-way check valve. If you have this, then 30 compressions to 2 breaths is the recommended version of CPR, keeping in mind that we want to add that extra layer of protection using this barrier device here. A better layer of protection would be the adult pocket mask. An even better layer of protection would be the back valve mask. But these are the parts that the AED comes with. Now let's take a look at the AED unit itself. All right, now taking a look at the AED unit itself, you'll notice that this one will not blink green because this is the trainer version, but most AEDs that you'll ever see prior to even taking it out, you're gonna notice that there's a clear plastic here. This clear plastic lets us see the status of the battery life of the AED. It should blink green every 3 to 5 seconds just to let you know that the AED is working properly. Just to show you here, where you can see the status of the battery life. Taking a look at the AED unit itself. Taking a look at the side of the AED is a slot for the lithium battery. The lithium battery is what sends the shock to the patient. The very first time it shocks the patient is 200 joules, followed by 260 joules. Now, depending on make and model, 3rd, 4th, 5th, and 6th, and consecutive can cap off with 260 or 300 joules. As far as you're concerned, who cares joules? Just know that these AEDs, if it's strong enough to start a heart, it's important for us to remember that it's strong enough to stop a heart. So you are delegated to grab the AED. It's important that you don't get tunnel vision and just look at the shock button. Meanwhile, my partner is still doing compressions. If my partner is still doing compressions while I push shock, then I have 2 patients. So you don't want to be that person. Alternatively, you also want to make sure if you have the AED, you want the AED as close to you as possible, meaning you do not want to put the AED across from you, across from the patient, so that way when you do push shock, it prevents you from reaching over the patient and pushing shock. What can potentially happen as I reach over to push shock, I make sure everyone is clear. Who knows? Before I push shock, maybe my leg, maybe my belt, maybe anything touches the patient, I end up shocking myself. Also very embarrassing, okay? That's what the lithium battery is for. Now, depending on make and model, some AEDs will have another slot for a 9-volt or 9-volt lithium battery. This is what keeps the AED powered on. That's when you see this flashing green, that lets you know the status of the battery life. If it's a flashing red, it's time to change the battery. If it's not flashing at all, then collectively we drop that ball. Taking a look at the front of the AED. This particular brand, you'll notice that there are 2 buttons and 2 buttons only. There's an on and off green switch, and then there's a triangle orangey red shock button. There are 2 buttons and 2 buttons only, meaning there's no button for analyze, which means once you turn the AED unit on, once you've attached it onto this patient, it should automatically analyze on its own. If you don't know the steps, that's okay. Most AEDs will have the instructions either on the AED unit itself with steps 1, 2, 3, or 4, or it can have the steps in the padding itself. As you can see here,